Welcome back. We're finally going to start to build some user interface, some user experience here in our application. So from the last time when we left off and I was just updating the title text, what we really wanted to do was take this WinJS binding list and take the results from our Twitter search, this is our collection of result tweets, take the list that we create, and we want to bind that list up to the user interface. And what we want to do is display all our tweets in kind of a nice grid layout that makes it easy to kind of browse those. Now, if you love angle brackets, you can stay inside of Visual Studio, switch over to the page you want to start to modify, and I could come in here and do something real simple like this, right? Where I could just kind of start to change the title of my particular page here. Or if you wanted, you could come in and keep going, and if your love of angle brackets is that strong, just hand code everything here, which is totally acceptable. And then you'd get into the kind of the classic sort of code up some HTML, code up some templates, run your app, see if the JavaScript generates the layout that you want, right? Lots of dynamic content and kind of this markup, run, modify sort of process. Fortunately, we give you a tool that allows you to work in these interactive environments very easily, and that tool is Expression Blend. And so what I can do is come over to the Solution Explorer, right-click on a page or on the solution or the project and say Open in Blend. Go ahead and save our changes. And what we get now is the HTML interface in Blend to allow us to work with dynamic HTML and edit it and lay it out and change the look and feel of our application. And you see this immediately on what's happening. It may not be necessarily obvious, but it's happening right now. Remember, in default HTML here, or if we look, there's just this single div tag in the body that happens to be a page navigator control. But what's happening? Expression Blend is running the JavaScript in default.js that tells this control to load in home.html. So I see the results of this page running already. And just to kind of reinforce that point, if we look at live DOM and drill down, we get down to this div here almost immediately. And there's this little lightning bolt to us next to it. And it's telling us that this div is being created at runtime by the JavaScript. And what this div is it's what's going to be holding the home.html content. And I can even come in and start to modify home.html because I see it here. So I delete that. And that's actually going and modifying home.html. And I can continue on with that process and interactively design a dynamic HTML page. So what I'm going to do, just to show that, is I'm going to come over to my JavaScript controls. And these are just controls that are created using nothing more than HTML and JavaScript. So these aren't like some weird proprietary load at runtime control. It's just JavaScript and HTML. And I'm going to bring this list box into my DOM in this case. I can drag it onto the design surface as well if I wanted to. And I've added this ListView. And in my HTML attributes here, why don't we just give this a name so we can reference it later. We'll call it grid view 1. And immediately one thing I notice is that when I look at the grid view, well, gee, it's not filling up the entire screen. I really don't like that. What's causing that to happen? So I can switch over to my CSS properties tab, and I can see all of the winning properties that are being accumulated from all the different style sheets. So it's coming from UIDark.css, if there's anything in default CSS, home.css, all those are being applied. And I can see here that from the WinListView rule, that the height is being set to 400 pixels. Well, I don't like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to grid view here. I'm going to right click on it. I'm going to say, let's go ahead and create a new style rule, in this case, based on the element ID. And that'll just get stuck into our project. And what that will allow me to do is on that style rule now over in my properties window, I could come into sizing, for example, and say, well, let's go ahead and just override the default and say I want it to be 100%. The height's now 100% and it now fills up the whole screen. That's really nice. So we'll switch back to HTML attributes and set up a couple more things. So we'll switch over here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well, I need an item template to lay out my tweet. So let's create a new one of those, and we'll just call this tweet template, and we'll just reference it by ID if we need to identify it. And then I need to give it a layout. And all this is a JavaScript function that we provide by default, where I can do either things in a grid style or kind of a vertical, horizontal sort of list layout. And we'll choose grid. Say okay. And so far, we're not seeing a whole lot. I'm not really showing you the power of this dynamic layout, right? So what we're going to do is we'll save all these changes. Let's go back into Visual Studio and complete. We need to let Visual Studio that it's okay to load the changes. And you can see here, here's my tweet template that's been defined as just normal, everyday HTML. come back into home page, and we need to complete the last step here. And that last step is to connect the list to the grid. And I'll just reference GridView directly. You could, if you wanted, look it up with a document.getElementById if you want, but we'll just reference it directly. Now this gives me the div, right? This gives me the HTML element from the DOM. I want to treat that as a window control because that's where all of the unique properties for the control reside. And the one I'm most interested in is item data source. And what I want to do is set that data source to my lists data source. Now let's save this. So we've just connected the data to the control. We're going to switch back to Blend. I'm going to come up and I'm going to hit refresh. And now you can see we're actually getting stuff populated. And you may say, well, that's kind of ugly. Why is that? Well, let's go down and click some of these items and see why that is what it is. Well, when I drill down here in the live DOM, if we look over, we can see that based on the DOM, there's lots of dynamic elements. You can see they're being highlighted there as I hover over them. And on this particular one, there's a div. And if I look, what's happening is it's just this. This is my tweet template, right? Here's the containing div. And it's just binding the text content to this, right? And so we're just getting objects back from our call. So that's what we get. And obviously, that's not what we really, really want. So let's go ahead and on the div itself, let's go ahead and right click and say I want to add a new class to this div. And we're just going to call this my tweet class. Okay, and we're going to create a style rule targeting this class. Say OK. And now you can see now that we've chosen a style rule, we can see all of them being highlighted. So for example, if I come over to style rules, if I pick the grid view style rule, it gets outlined in green, the grid does. But if I look at the tweet style, all the tweets get highlighted. And then I can come over to my CSS properties and I can actually start to modify this. So I can come in and say, well, let's go ahead and make it maybe 500 pixels wide, and why don't we make it about 130 pixels tall? So now you can see we're starting to get the basic shape of what we want our tweet to look like. That div, as a matter of fact, since it's the containing div, I'm going to come into the layout and I'm going to say, you know what, let's use this as a grid. That way I can kind of get a little more control over the layout that's going to happen. So we'll go ahead and pick a single one. And now I'm into that grid mode where I can start to visually lay out content. I like this object here as far as displaying text. So we'll just move it over here for right now. And then I'm going to add a couple other items. So I'm going to come over into my assets here. Let's just go get regular HTML controls for this. And maybe what the first thing I want to do is, let's go ahead and, actually we'll go to all here. Let's find an image tag. So there's an image. And we'll drag that in and drop the image in. And just for grins, instead of creating a style rule for this, I'm just going to come over to my CSS property window and do an inline style. And what I want to tell that image to do is I want it to span both rows. So now it kind of jumps over both rows. And why don't we go ahead and control its sizing, and we'll say we want it to be 64 pixels by 64 pixels. So kind of setting up its sizing a little bit. Why don't we give it a margin on the side of about 10 pixels. Come back over to our assets here and let's find, how about an H2 tag. We'll grab that and drop that into the top part of our environment. We'll go ahead and set up our rows a little bit differently. We're going to go ahead and say, why don't you auto size please, so it kind of snaps in there a little better. And we'll go ahead and auto size the top row as well to fit that content. And now I need to change the data binding, and this is where things start to get really cool. I'm going to go ahead and select that H2 element. I'm going to switch back over to my HTML attributes. Here is the text content. We'll go ahead and get rid of the default. Click on the box here and say I'd like to edit the data binding. And I want to bind to, how about from username. And all of a sudden, bam, I've now got, using the property from the tweet, I can see who posted this. I can come to the object here, and why don't we go ahead and edit its data binding, and we'll just change this to the text. Now we can see the text. Why don't we go ahead and widen up this box a little bit so the content lays out. Obviously, I could just resize that with a CSS rule to make it 100%, but we'll just do it that way. And then on image, we'll go ahead and clear this. That's just kind of the default placeholder that we get from a design perspective. Edit the data binding. And if I remember right, it's the profile, and we will put in the profile image URL. And if I hit enter, you can see now all of a sudden my display updates with the images, and I have this nice layout. So if we go ahead and just save all of this, I can then jump back into Visual Studio. We'll reload everything. Why don't we just run this in the simulator this time? Go ahead and launch the application. And we can see as the app launches, there's my tweet scan title. We're going out and hitting Twitter. And here's all of my results. I'm on a very big screen right now, so we can see lots of results that I can scroll around. If I wanted to, I could come in and change the resolution like we talked before. And go ahead and drop this down so we can now see my content on a slightly smaller screen. So that is the initial basics of designing a dynamic HTML experience for a Windows 8 application. And next time, we'll start to add even more features to our app. Thanks.